welcome back. Now that Thanksgiving is over and we've given our thanks and filled our bellies with various different goodies, it's time to move on to the holiday season. For most people today, that means standing in line and getting trampled on during Black Friday. To me, that means sitting in here making some nice, cool LED projects for you guys to watch. Now, this is actually the first time I can ever remember in my whole career of working of having Black Friday off. So it's even better for me because I don't have to drive and all the madness that goes, since the area I work in is in a very highly retail area. And you tend to get a lot of traffic. Anyway, so we're going to go to today's kit, which is sitting here in this bag. I did pick this up a few weeks ago. Actually, when I ordered all the capacitors to do the jukebox repair, I ordered this in just to get my total over a certain amount. It's just something I try to do. And I knew it was going to take a while to get. So I figured, let me get this in, because it did, after all, come from China. I got this at a price of $3.92 with $1.85 shipping for the e-packet. And it comes from a seller called Alice 1101983. I will, of course, put a link in the description below for that particular item if you'd like to build one of these yourselves. But keep in mind that from Shenzhen, China to here, New Windsor, New York, in the United States, obviously, it took me quite a few weeks to get it. It took me less time than I thought, but alas, I knew it was going to take a while, and I wanted to have it in for the holiday season to build this for you guys. So without any further delay, we're going to get into the project with just a slight camera adjustment. Now, up on screen here are some preliminary tools. We have the helping hands, which always becomes useful at some point in a soldering project. We have the Hakko FX888D soldering iron. This is my now iron of choice. And then we also have a roll of 6040 solder. This is the leaded stuff. I don't mess around with lead-free solder. It's just not conducive to my sanity. And of course the kit. So I already opened this when it came in because I kind of forgot about it. I said, oh, what's this? I wasn't expecting this. And yeah, it was what I thought it was. But you can see they've actually wrapped it pretty nicely in bubble wrap here. And it's a pretty easy kit to follow, although you can see there's no instructions in here. What you do have is a list of components on the listing that we'll take a look at. And we'll start with the boards, since these are the easiest things to take out of the kit. Now these are actually really nicely engineered. You can see they are two-sided boards. And you know, the traces and the layout and the screen printing and everything on them is really nice, nice quality. There's no sharp edges around the, edges of the board here, which is great. But what I'll probably do, I don't have a schematic of this, and I didn't really take time to doodle one out. But I'll put these in frame for just a couple seconds. So if you want to see where everything's connected to, that would probably be a good way to do it. And there's two of these actual Christmas tree legs. And you can see it's got that slit in the middle of it here. And that's how they nest together with the other, the other piece. And the LEDs on this are actually going to fire out sideways, so I'll have to bend them into position once we're ready to do it. And from the look of the components, it's all passive components. There's some transistors, some capacitors, resistors, and LEDs. And that's fundamentally it. It's a very easy kit to put together. There's no logic chips or anything like that, which is kind of a good thing because you can follow how this is put together. You can see we have the positive and negative on the bottom, and they have these little arrows indicating something here, which we'll point out in a few minutes. But all in all, it's so far a really good quality kit. Now we can see the screen printing is only on one side because that's really the only side you'll need it on. But the unfortunate thing about having this white outline here, it does actually block some of the traces on here, so you can see some of them do run up along over here. But as far as nesting these go, they should just nest together like this. They slide right in, so you can see it's going to have like a three-dimensional kind of effect. But to make sure we line these up right, we'll look at the bottom board, because I did notice they have positive and negative. So these outer ones are positives and these are the negatives. So when you slot these together, we're going to want to make sure that they fit into that scheme. So right now you see I have a negative and a positive opposing each other. and that doesn't work necessarily unless you get it in the right position like this. So you can see that's positive there, and the next one's over here, so that all lines up. So that's pretty much looks like how that's going to go. And I haven't really decided how to attack this, you see, because you're going to have to solder these together in halves and then put the halves together and solder it into the base and then go from there. So I'm not really 100% sure on how to implement that. So it'll be a trial by error kind of project here, I guess we'll say. So we'll lay these out, and then the rest of these are all just the regular active or passive components, I should say. There is no active components. We got a standard little USB lead, and this is just for power. It runs on AAA batteries, it seems like, or AA's. I think it's AA's. Certainly looks like a AA holder. It does run on 3 of those, so that would be 4.5 volts. Of course, USB is 5 volts, so that's pretty close. But then you get resistors. So of course the resistors are not marked, but they'll have the color code on them. And for ease of use, I'll put the color codes with the proper colors in the description below, so if you're looking for that, you'll know where to find it. And then the rest is just all the transistors and capacitors and LEDs. They're all just kind of loose in here. There's a little switch so you can turn the thing on and off. There's also a tiny little DC jack, which is pretty nice. Here's those transistors. And again, all this will be down in the description. If I can get in close on it, we can see the number. And that's S9014. So what that looks like, I'm not sure if that's an NPN or a PNP transistor, but that'll all be down below. And then your capacitors, these are, I think, all the same. I think they're all 47 microfarad 16 volt, which are actually the ones, if I remember correctly, that I got in for the jukebox repair. And then LEDs, there's just red, green, and yellow. As you can see, short leads, no big deal. But they're going to go in on this board over here, along where it says D2, D8, D14, and it's probably not going to be very evident by looking at these, but you'll be able to tell the polarity. One of these pads is round and the other one is square, and that's indicative of polarity. And sometimes they'll actually put on the silk screen a little flat. It's not a complete circle, it's a little flat, like a D almost on one side, and that indicates the negative side. You're not going to see it very well on this camera, but one of these sides on this LED here is flattened out. That all helps with keying. But regardless, when you put them in, they're going to want to sit straight up like that, and that's not how they're going to go. They're actually going to have to get bent outward like that. So I guess part of this is going to be just positioning all of the proper components, and, you know, getting them where they have to go. I'm going to refer back to the picture of the completed object, which I'll just flip the camera around in a moment here and show you, so we can get an idea of what this is going to look like when it's done. Because there are some things that aren't as obvious. For example, up on top, there's a couple leads up here where it says positive and negative, but in the actual listing of it, they show an LED popping straight up. So it doesn't actually have the diode marking on top there. So I don't know if that's something that they just did for the sake of it, or if it's actually part of this project or not. So there's definitely some discovery that has to be made with this particular project. But what I'll do now is I'll get the camera turned around, we'll look at the completed project, just a quick listing view, and when I come back before I actually start doing anything, I'll have all this organized on the table here just to make this build a lot easier. And here is that listing as I mentioned, and you can see the seller, the price, the cost, the whole 9 yards. And this is, like I said, what it looked like when it's done. You can see that single red LED up on the top. Of course, this one shows the power lead coming into it. And it almost looks like they have all the colors. It's not random. They have it as a pattern for sure. You can see going up the left side, it starts with yellow, red, then green, and repeats up the side. But on the right side, it goes green, red, yellow. And the very front facing flap, it's red, yellow, green. So I'll have to I'll have to look around a little bit here and see. Unfortunately, this is one of those stock image photos that when you go to sell this, the seller just puts their name on top of it. As you can see, the little Alice little logo there on top. But you can almost see, if you look at the power connector, at least I can see it to my naked eye here, the power connector there has what looks like part of a watermark on top of it. So they may have actually just taken this image from somewhere else. And for sure, when you type in this LED Christmas tree kit or anything along the lines, you get many sellers that have the same exact thing with just a little bit different picture because there are watermarks on it. So it'd be nice if I could find the original supplier of this kit. Maybe they might have more information on their particular site or whatever, but it doesn't really actually ever tell you. So if you look in here, it tells you, you know, the film resistors and the actual value of it and whatnot, and how many you get of each part. But the thing is where you see like number 4 and number 5, it just has LED listed with a line, and it has red and green, and nowhere does it mention yellow. So, oh yeah, and also it has a 9-volt battery box listed, but nowhere does it have a 9-volt box. It's 3, like I said, AA, AAA kind of, you know, whatever batteries. So yeah, it's I like kits like this sometimes because it's not all cut and dry. You know, you would think, oh, here's all the components. Yeah, they just slot into little slots and solder it in, you're good to go. But that's not always the case. You know, sometimes you do have to interpret a little bit here and see. And I was kind of hoping that maybe, you know, in the listing here, they would actually tell you how the thing works or something, but they do. I'll zoom in on that and just let you guys read that for a moment, because it's your standard Chinglies. I can't fault anybody for bad translation. It's inevitable, but sometimes when you have to read these things and translate it yourself to not only your language from the Chinglies, but you might have to also technically translate it too, because sometimes that always doesn't translate. And yeah, you can kind of see just the little blurb up on top here is kind of funny too. It is a simple circuit. I mean, I don't want to overanalyze it. It is just a couple caps, a couple resistors, a couple transistors, and that's it. You call it a day. But you know, they're going to oscillate. They're going to have some kind of a blink sequence to them for sure. And since the colors do seem like they're sort of randomized between the boards, I'm not sure what kind of pattern it will be. You know, if you put all the reds in the middle, all the greens on top, and all the yellows in the bottom, will you have the same clear-cut pattern all around, or is that why they randomized the colors? I don't really know. All I know is this intro is getting quite long already, and I just want to get into the project now. So I'll go ahead and get the desk all cleaned up, and we'll take a better look at this. I did some poking around online just to see what I was getting into here, and yeah, the description I'm reading on the actual listing is the same description pretty much everywhere on eBay. They've just all copied each other. And when you try to look up this EQ kit brand here, you don't really get much on it, unfortunately. I did find out these are NPN transistors, but where it gets a little bit strange here is if you look at this board, they actually have all the 10K resistors marked. So here, here, and here, and these two guys here, which would be, just by process of elimination, this whole list of them here, because you have, you know, multiples. But the other ones, you see there's 2, 2, and 2, and if you look, there's 3 sets of color. And what makes this kind of confusing is they don't actually have the other resistor sections marked. Yeah, so what that means is it's going to be dependent on what color goes where, which they don't tell you where to put them, nor do they tell you which resistor is supposed to go with which color. Well, that's a whole big thing now, isn't it? So that means we're going to have to get some math or maths involved to see which one goes where. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, honestly. Ohm's law, resistor calculator, you know, one of those kinds of things. I'm assuming that's what we're going to try to figure out here. Just knowing from what I know, usually the green LEDs are on a higher voltage than the red ones. Usually that's like 3.2 and these are 2.2, and we'll have to see which value we'll need, obviously. But more importantly, where each one lines up. Now, I can tell you just from looking at this, all the resistors are on the negative side of the LED, and so is the switching. So, and it seems like they're using capacitors to set the value of the actual switch. So if we look, there's 6 transistors, there's 6 capacitors, there's 3 different sets of colors, and if you look, there's actually 6 total resistors of the you know, 2 of each value for the actual color portions here. So knowing that, again, by process of elimination, I can assume that this is going to be using groups of 3s, or yeah, 2 groups of 3. So we'll probably have, you know, reds, yellows, and greens in groups of 2, alternately blinking back and forth. And I'm assuming definitely they're going to be blinking. There's not going to be like soft fades in and out. These are definitely going to be actual blinks. So yeah, that's going to make this project really fun to try to figure out. Luckily, we know where the 10K resistors go. We know where the capacitors go. We know what the polarity of those caps are. You can see by the hashed out marks. The hashed out is going to be the ground side, and the non-hashed is going to be the positive. In fact, you can actually see there is a little plus lead there. So when we put those in, those will be really easy to do. The transistors, you can only go really one way in here. So that does make that easy. And I did figure out by following this, if you look, here's positive, and you can actually see the trace on the other side of the board. That's this trace here. That actually goes out into the very first LED right here. So the square pads on here are going to be the positive, and then the round pad is going to be negative. There is a little bit of silk screening just behind that pad that might indicate that, but the type of symbol they used isn't specifically clear enough. So that's going to be the scheme. Now, question is do I go by what the website had, or do I go by process of elimination and try to figure out the best way to do this? I think I'm going to go back to the website, and just with these boards in hand, we're just going to look at the picture and reference to see which one goes which way. Now, of course, I went ahead and pulled up the original picture, and the thing is backwards. It seems that somehow it got mirrored, so everything was flipped completely around the other way. And I'm assuming they did this to circumvent any kind of copyright protection that there may be on the actual picture. So what I did was took a screenshot of that, brought it into Paintbrush, and flipped it back around the proper way. And this was a big help, because you can actually go in and see, well, I can see the actual numbers of the diodes over here for the actual LEDs. And that was very helpful, because I can see now this is D6, this is D13, so on and so forth. And again, I keep using the word process of elimination. That term is going to be a big thing here, but I basically eliminated all the diode numbers that I could see on the right and left of the board, as well as this front facing side right here. Now, there's obviously a fourth side that's on the blind side to us that obviously we can't see. That's where the process of elimination comes through. And I'll allude to that here in just a moment. You can actually see, for everyone's benefit, I made up a nice organized Excel sheet. And of course it says CTR-30B twice, but I can assure you that's just because I copied. This is actually A. If I can get to my keyboard. A. All right, that's what we need. You can see there are some question marks. That's the blind side. But if you look at the chart above, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, here's 16, 17, 18, therefore 13, 14, 15 has to be there as well. This is the actual order that I did this in, and this is just the organized order to make it easier for reading. And you can see how it's consecutive runs and numbers. And this will start at one diode on one side of the board and wrap itself up and around to the other side of the board. And that's the case with both boards. Now, what does make this more confusing is even though this is side A and this is side B, they use the same diode numbers and the same resistor numbers. Fortunately, if you use a multimeter, which I'll show you back in a moment on the bench, you can actually trace out all the negative lines on all these diodes with the continuity tester. So if you put the probe at negative and then touch over to the negative of here, it'll go beep, 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 you know, the whole way through. And then I probed all the resistor numbers and I found one of the pads. And I did that with all three, and indeed R2, 4, and 6 would coincide with these numbers. Now the cool thing about this is you can put these colors in any of the ones you want, providing that they're in that line. So you could make yellow D1, D2, 3, so on and so forth. But you got to also make sure you change the resistor code. And again, going back to that main picture here, what I essentially did was looked at whatever resistors that I could see here and figured out by their color code where they belong. So you could see, for example, the R2 resistor went to, which is orange, orange, brown, was a 33 ohm resistor, which makes sense because, like I mentioned, green usually draws the most, so that has the lowest resistance on their limiting resistors. And obviously the red has the highest and yellow's right in the middle. So that makes perfect sense. So if you follow that same guideline with both boards here and just put the proper colors within the proper lines, this will work fine for you. But you do have to make sure you have them right. So I'll put that up here one more time so you guys can take a look at it. But that is arbitrary. That is based on the pictures that I found on this online and my own kind of dead reckoning. So fill in the blanks here with the rest of the lines from here. Move your resistors to coincide with your proper colors. You get the general idea. And just to show you that little trick with the multimeter, here it is set in continuity. You may hear a beep. If you put this down on the positive side over here and start probing along, you'll see that that thing beeps on every positive pad on this thing. So that's a really good way to trace this out to find exactly where everything is. And then if you do the same thing with the negative, you should be able to figure out which one of these strings lines up with that line. And of course, since I mentioned it goes from negative into the resistor, and it comes out of the transistor. So the transistor is doing the switching, and the capacitors, I believe, are setting the actual time that I think one charges as another one dissipates, and that's what turns one transistor on over the other. And we'll see that in operation once this is put together. But now that we know where everything's going, what everything is, I took the liberty of actually marking down on the little tab up here what the value was of these actual resistors. I did that using a color code calculator. You can find these online all over the place. There's even software you can download on your computer, but you basically hold it with the silver or gold band to the right side, and then you would read red, red, brown. You put them into the color calculator and it tells you that it's a 33 ohm resistor. The other thing you can do, I'll bring this into frame, is use a multimeter and you put it onto ohms, which is right here. And if you take that resistor and you touch one side of it and the other side of it like this, you'll get in some approximation. Now this says it's 321 ohm. Perhaps I don't have good connection. I'm also doing this on my anti-static mat, so that's probably not such a good idea. I might be picking up some kind of conductivity in the mat. Let's see if I use alligator clips, that might make this a little bit neater. Well, 321. But it is a 330 ohm. So 321 is close enough because there is a tolerance. That's what the final band, the color one, is. I believe gold is 5% tolerance. So that seems about right. If you want, you could check the other one here. We should have a fairly close number. 325, so you see that's closer into spec, but those are definitely the 33. I'll do this one more time with the 10K, just so you can see what the 10K looks like. 9.88 kilo ohm. It does have a little K ohm here. And this is a auto ranging multimeter, by the way, so you know, if you may have multiple ranges, so that's one of the reasons why I don't like multiple range multimeters. The auto range are a lot easier to work with, especially when you don't know exactly what you're doing. It's easier to read the number. You don't have to know you're in the right range by guess. Anyway, so yeah, we definitely know what each component is here. If I want, I could break out the LED tester and just throw those LEDs into the tester to test them out, but given that there are so many of them, that might be kind of a time waste. But again, on these, longer is positive, shorter is negative. And oh, I got it reversed, see that? And you can see it lights up. They're not going to be terribly bright. It's not like we're using clear LEDs here. These are just your standard indicator lights. I showed you those with the NPN transistors already. Capacitors, when we get into soldering these are polarity sensitive. You're going to look for the stripe over here. This is the negative stripe, and then the longer lead is the positive. Again, just like the LEDs, pretty simple. And that was the wife calling me to say she was on her way home. Sorry about that. Had to spend some time with her, and now of course we're back to this project. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera into time-lapse mode. Hopefully that works out well. That's always one of those things. I have an idea of it working, but then whatever. But what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to start with the smallest components first, which will be these resistors. And I will probably work my way around the board, putting all the LEDs in, and then I'm pretty sure I'll move into the transistors and capacitors. And I'll start with this board first. So you'll see me do that and do this, and I'll come back when all of that is completed before I actually connect it. Before I get too far ahead of myself, as I started getting everything lined up here, I noticed that there was one fundamental difference between this board and this board. The R7 resistor. Now this thing kind of eluded me for a few minutes, so I had to do an inventory count here because I thought I had an even number of 36 LEDs, and I actually have 37. So yeah, the red LED on top is indeed correct, and it appears that it might not flash. You can see there is a positive and a negative up here. If you follow those two lines directly down the middle over here, you can actually see where the R7 resistor kind of connects with that. It actually comes up the back over here. You can see that lead right here, and there's no marking on that. So again, that's one of those color dependent resistors, but when you're left over, as mentioned, you have two of each. It's actually an extra 10K resistor, so I put the 10K resistor with the leftover LED up at the top here. So when I do this one particular board, that does have to get worked in. And to double check that, I looked at the other board. There is no R7 resistor on there, just the one. So it would have been a little nicer if from the factory they actually had the designations written on here like they do with the 10K resistors, and actually somewhere listed what color belonged in what position here, but alas, I digress. It is what it is, and we're going to go ahead and start assembling this. And that wasn't so bad. If you were noticing, you may have seen some of these LEDs popped out of place when I flipped them over. So what I ended up doing is when I stuck them in the board, I bent the leads outward to get them into position, and then I splayed them this way, and that way they wouldn't fall back out. And then I could use my finger to hold it in place as I soldered it in. And I just hit one lead. That way, for a couple reasons. One, just holds it in place. That way it's not just trying to, you know, be fiddly with too many things going on at once. I can just hold it into place, and then I'll come back and solder the other connection. And two, that way it doesn't put too much heat in this component. I even did that with the transistors and stuff. I'd hit one lead, then go to another, then another, and then I would just alternate back and forth between the three until all three sets of leads were soldered. But you can see, it came out pretty good. And what I'll do is I'll clean the flux off and everything here before I actually assemble this completely. But these two boards are done, so for all intent and purpose, we can actually use my desktop power supply here, set it to 4.5 volts, and power these up individually, and hopefully we can test them out. So we'll take this as mentioned, and I'll move this up to the 4.5 volts. I do plan on, I did a video on this particular power supply in steps on how I built it, but I didn't actually do a full video on it, and that's one thing I actually will get to do. The milliamps, will set this, I don't know, 100 milliamps, 130 milliamps, that's fine because I'm just there. So I'll pitch back down here, and we'll test these lights out and see if they work, hopefully. Now I could actually go through and check all the traces here and all the solder points just to make sure there's nothing touching. And here's the moment of truth, and they do light up, which is pretty good. And you can see, yeah, it's kind of like a blinky kind of a thing going on here. Now that's of course one panel. We'll disconnect that, we'll try out the other panel, and they both should work. Yep, and they are independent of each other. The only thing that's going to connect the two of them is the actual positive and negative rails down here at the bottom, but they do completely work independently of each other. So now the next thing is figuring out the best way to get these two pieces together and how that LED is going to attach at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and figure that part out right now. Now when sliding these together, as you can see, I have already done that here. You do have to actually be careful of how these transistors line up. They can hit each other, so you might have to just splay them out a little bit. And the same thing over here with this transistor and the capacitor. It kind of does the same thing. But they do line up pretty well. There's actually two arrows here in the middle, and you can see they are opposing each other. And then there's also another arrow down here on the bottom on one of these legs. That's right here. And that's going to key in to the arrow right here on this board. So before you actually go too far, you do actually want to put that in there and make sure positive here are on the same side, because you can see these are the positive pads and these are negative, and they line up. So everything's really good in that regard. So to connect this, where those arrows are, there's two solder pads, and that's what we're going to actually connect to. We're actually going to solder that on all four sides here. There's one of those down here, one of those here. So we'll have to be careful of that. Now initially I thought, since there's a hole in that, I was going to actually pass a wire through and somehow loop it around and then twisty tie it, so it's going to be physically connected, as well as you know, connected through solder there. But I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pull that maneuver off. It's possible. In fact, I could probably do it with one of these leads here, one of these thin leads, but that'll require some, you know, needle nose pliers and stuff like that to fish it through. Do I accept that challenge? Well, yes, I did accept the challenge, and it worked. You can see there's a little twist right here. So of course I'll solder it in that place. Wasn't that hard, but yeah, it's probably not necessary. All right, that proved to be a little tricky, trying to get this the soldering iron and everything in there together. But if you do it just right, you can get the tip in and actually hit both pads and the wire at the same time. Only thing about that is this is the only piece of thermal mass, I'll call it, in this area. It's just all connected to each other. So what happens is as you heat up one side of this, the other side tends to loosen up a little bit, and you get this kind of wonky thing going on here. So what I actually did was I set it into the base, and just on the tabletop here, just sort of stood it upright, used my helping hands just to kind of steady it. And that way I was able to square this up nice and neatly. So I'll do the remaining one in the middle here, and then I'll tack the resistor on the top, the LED on the top, I should say. Now that's just going to connect across the positive and negative and stick straight up. No big deal there. And the other two pads don't actually connect to anything. If I want, I can, you know, fish the leads through, but that's going to be a little bit harder, I think, up there. And there we have it. That went together, again, pretty easy. What I did up here was I just folded the lead out so it went into the pad it was supposed to, and then touched the one adjacent to it. So they're tacked in the corner here, and they're tacked in the other corner here, and obviously they don't touch. And then there's also, I went ahead and did all the connections here in the middle as well. And one final check before I actually put this onto the base. I'll put it onto here first, and you can see the red LED up on the top is solid, as I suspected. And of course, these aren't going to be on because they're not jumped at the bottom. That is the only place they do connect. So if we want to see the other side, we'll just connect it up like this real quick. And indeed, it does work. All right, so now the thing is going to be to set this into its base. Now, there's other things to put on here, like the battery terminals, which are actually, the battery box is going to sit at the bottom. There's actually an outline area for it. The wires are going to pass up through here, and then they're going to connect to the pads on the other side. There's the jack over here for the power in, and then there's also the power switch on this side. So I'll have to put those things in. I think I'm going to do those first before I put this up on top. Another thing I'll point out, you're actually going to see there's two holes over here on either side of the DC jack. That's meant to have a wire passed up and around it just to hold it in place. So that is one thing I'm going to do. I actually have the wire in the drawer that the camera here is in front of, so we'll have to move that. And before I do the final job soldering this in, you can see what I mean about that wire. This is just bare wire here. I picked this up in spools of 3 at the dollar store. It's always good to have on hand. But I just passed a little piece of that through, bent it over, and you can see there's 3 leads in the back. Those are also just splayed outwards here, just to neaten it up a little bit, make it easy to hold into place. All right, last 2 components are put in place. All I have to do now is attach the battery box and attach the actual tree to the base. So to do the battery box, you can see there's a couple of these tiny little screws and nuts here. The screws are the kind that are countersunk into the holes here. So those will go in, the nut will stick out the top. But you can see here they got these really long leads, and there's kind of this channel over here to get the wire to come down the one side over here. Also, here are those holes that the wires are going to come through, and they're going to solder to these pads here. Now I had thought maybe I'll put the tree on first, but once you actually do that, things get a little tight up here. So I think I'm actually going to put the battery box on first. I'm not really sure either way, to be honest with you, but it just seems like trying to get down to those little nuts there would be a little bit easier with this knot here. I could be completely wrong though, but what I do know is I have to take these leads and pass them through. So if we do this from the back side here with the black and then the red, like so, you can see that once I pull those through, I can just position this battery box. Now here are those holes for the screws, so that'll line up like this. And if we do this just right, we can get this all to kind of sit nice and flush, and we'll pull these leads tight. So I'll go ahead and attach the battery the battery compartment right now. All right, there's your battery box. You can see the leads coming up. So now it's just a matter of trimming these leads, just get them exposed, tuck them down to the pads, solder them in. And now finally we can attach the tree. It's just going to be a matter of sitting the 2 of these in and just hitting the pads with solder. There's nothing really else to do. You can't really physically connect this before we actually solder it in. So it's just going to slot in like that, and I'll have to hit both sides of the pads up all around there. And this will be best done like I did before, just stabilize it on the table and then have something hold it in place. And there we have it. That's the whole completed project. I threw some batteries in the bottom here and turn the switch on. You can see it lights up perfectly. So So that was a pretty interesting project to put together. Obviously it wasn't just a cut and paste kind of thing where I just put all the components in the spot. You clearly see that there was some work involved in figuring out where some of the components went. Usually these kits aren't that involved, honestly. They're usually a lot easier. What would have made this any better? Well, telling me where the LEDs went and the respective resistors went, that would have been nice. Or some kind of a sheet saying, hey, you can put them pretty much wherever you want, but you should put these resistors with these LEDs in groups. That would have been nice too. But all in all, for the money, I really can't complain. This was a very cheap kit to do, and a pretty fun one, even though, you know, it did take me all afternoon. I was working on it in bits and pieces, but it is what it is. And with that, I want to thank you for watching. If you're not already a subscriber, you can click on the little link in the corner over here to subscribe. And you can also click out on the other videos here just to see what else I have in my collection. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next video.